No sooner had news trickled out of the courtroom had his supporters begun celebrating and chanting. Ecstatic that after 10 years of legal fights, they had some form of victory.
We welcome today's decision. We are relieved that Mr. Assange will not be extradited to the United States. We share concerns about his health and his mental health. We have been highlighting this for quite some time, that he has been vulnerable, that we have stated, and I'll repeat today, that his extradition was a possible matter of life or death.
Earlier, Assange's team began the day with low expectations. His fiancée had called on Donald Trump to pardon the father of her 2 children. He arrived to the court in the back of this high-security van. Inside the courtroom, the judge dismissed most of Assange's defence, but she conceded that his mental health was such that to extradite him would be oppressive.
Come on, fire!
This lengthy legal battle began with a video that shocked the world. Classified footage of US Apache attack helicopters killing Iraqi civilians and journalists released by Assange.
It will shape an understanding of what the past 6 years of war has been like.
The US accused him and WikiLeaks of being enemy combatants. For the past decade, through thick and thin, Assange always maintained he was a journalist. The saga is not over yet. The US government said it will appeal today's decision.
Well, we're joined now by Niels Melzer. He's the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture and has visited Julian Assange in prison. He says the past 10 years have effectively been psychological torture for the WikiLeaks founder. Mr. Melzer, what's your take on today's ruling then?
Well, thank you very much for having me. Yes, clearly this judgment is a very important first step in the right direction. I think it is to be celebrated that the judge has recognized that the conditions of detention that Julian Assange would be facing in the US are oppressive. In my view, and in the view of many human rights organizations, they would actually amount to torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment, and that therefore, for medical reasons also, he cannot be extradited to the US. So that is a very important first battle to be won in this fight, and a battle that is also for the prohibition of torture and the recognition of that prohibition. On the other hand, we have to recognize that most of the judgment actually goes very far, unfortunately, in confirming and sustaining the rationale underlying the U.S. prosecution of Julian Assange, which could be setting a precedent by which other journalists could be prosecuted and extradited to the United States for espionage charges if they were to publish secret information.
So why did Mr. Assange's case in particular catch your attention?
To be quite honest with you, in the beginning, I refused to actually get into this case because I was very much marked by the same prejudices that the broader public has been affected by through the mainstream press reporting on Mr. Assange for 10 years. It was only when I started to actually look into pieces of evidence to see that whole narrative that has been spread about him for so long, was not supported by evidence. And that's what triggered my interest in this case. And I then visited him together with a medical team in Belmarsh prison, and we found that he showed all the symptoms that are typical for persons that have been exposed to psychological torture for a prolonged period of time.
Can you go into a bit more detail on that? You're an expert on torture. So in which way has he been tortured, and what's your assessment of his condition right now?
Yes, thank you for that question. It's important to clarify that obviously modern forms of torture, they cannot be compared to the kind of medieval forms of physical torture. It is very much a cumulative process of destabilizing people through isolation, humiliation. It's also judicial harassment, and I mean by this judicial proceedings that are not based on law, but are being conducted for political purposes, where procedural rights are systematically being violated. And so the person is being destabilized systematically We've seen that in many countries in the world, many regimes that try to use torture methods that don't leave physical traces. And in the end, it breaks a person. And we actually have a confirmation of that precise process in today's judgment, because it confirms that Julian Assange's mental health is so fragile today that he cannot even be extradited to the US without risking his suicide. And that actually confirms that his mental health has deteriorated dramatically. And that's also what we have observed together with my medical team.
Thank you very much. Niels Melzer, the UN Special Rapporteur on torture. A British judge has ruled that WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange cannot be extradited to the United States to face espionage charges. Let's bring in now Renata Avila. She's one of Julian Assange's lawyers. Ms. Avila, you've been in the front line of Mr. Assange's legal battle for years now. What do you make of today's ruling?
Well, today's ruling, it was a victory for humanity, I will say. Even in the UK and even after this punishment by process that Mr. Assange suffered for years and his family suffered for years, at least a glimpse of humanity arose from the decision of the judge. That they are deciding not to extradite him is the minimum human standard.
The extradition, the denial of the extradition request came because of his frail mental health. What more can you tell us about his condition right now?
Well, his conditions amount to torture, basically, and it is something that it has been confirmed by Niels Melzer, the UN Special Rapporteur on arbitrary detention and against torture. And it does not diminish his value as a courageous journalist, and it does not diminish his ability and capacity to live a good life. And I think that this judgment is just the opportunity to save his life and save his value as a person for society. And it is a very sad judgment if we consider that the justice conditions had placed a journalist under such psychological and physical pressure during a decade. That's terrifying. In the center of power, in the center of the West, yeah.
But US prosecutors have indicated that they'll appeal the decision of the court. Are you confident that you can fend off that appeal?
I think that I am confident that he's in a very solid position to win this case. There's a precedent, the Lori Love case precedent, which was won on appeal. And the case of Assange is in a solid position right now. And it is hard to question facts, and it is a fact. Medical facts are backing this decision. It's not an interpretation of the law. Solid medical facts documenting his health situation. And the mere appeal, it is shocking, actually. The only decent thing to do right now is to drop that case, to drop that extradition request.
You mentioned torture, which is pretty heavy allegations. Is there any evidence for that? And B, did it play a role in today's decision?
There's a documented file by Niels Melzer, a UN Special Rapporteur, documenting all the suffering that he has going through. And of course, it helped a lot having solid evidence on the deterioration of his mental health and his physical health under the conditions he was subject to. Just to give you an example, he was even denied the right for years, even the right to go outside the window and have some sunlight on his face. Things like that. The accumulation of abuses by authorities, by different authorities from Sweden, from the UK, and from the US led to the result of today. I hope he can recover fully.
Renata Avila, one of Julian Assange's lawyers, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.